Now let's bring in civil rights attorney Emeke Igwe for more on the trial. Emeke, thanks for joining us. Lawyers spent much of Friday's session arguing over the instructions, word by word, in fact, in more than 60 pages, I think, of jury instructions. How critical is this phase?
Phil, thanks for having me. This phase is absolutely critical because keep in mind what closing arguments is. Closing arguments are based upon the evidence that's been presented and the jury instructions. Key for the defense would be for the judge to rule that the McMichaels and Mr. Bryan had the right to detain Mr. Arbery if they had a reasonable suspicion that he had committed a crime, not just immediately, but based upon prior observations or suspicions of Mr. Arbery. That's going to be a key ruling in this case. Obviously, the prosecution wants to say that these defendants had no reasonable suspicion to stop Mr. Arbery. So how that's going to be presented to the jury depends on what the judge says in the instructions today.
Yeah, reasonable suspicion, and also the fact that the prosecutor got them to admit that they never told him that it was, or the police for that matter, that it was a citizen's arrest. What are you watching in the prosecution's closing argument here? The prosecution did a pretty good job cross-examining Travis McMichael, but what do you think they're going to do in the closing?
In the closing, this is the prosecution's last opportunity to address the jury. And you want to focus in on key admissions that they got from the defendants, in particular, Travis McMichael. The fact that he never said he had, that Mr. Arbery posed no threat to him in terms of having a weapon, in terms of him being unarmed and not trying to either, attack any of the defendants. So the prosecution wants to also focus on the fact that the defendants bypassed other people who had gone into that house, other white citizens who went to that house, and they didn't see anything suspicious about that. So the prosecution wants to paint this that Mr. Arbery was unfairly targeted because of his race, that these defendants chose to go after Mr. Arbery simply because he was a black man who was running through a neighborhood where they felt he didn't belong. So the prosecution really wants to harp upon that. So that's the last thing in the jury's mind before they go into their deliberations.
Right. So, and on the other side, we're going to hear three closing arguments from the defense, one for each defendant. I think Steve said 2 hours each attorney. How do you think these attorneys are going to handle that? And out of the three attorneys, who has the biggest challenge ahead?
Well, obviously, Kevin Goff for Mr. Bryan wants to separate his client from the other two defendants. In the case of the McMichaels, there's no question that they went after Mr. Arbery and they wanted to detain him. I don't think that's in dispute, the fact that they went after him. If you're Mr. Goff or Mr. Bryan, you want to separate your client and make it seem that he just came upon the scene just because he was there to figure out what was going on. Because there's a clear separation between Mr. McMichael and Mr. Bryan in terms of coming upon the scene. You want, as a defense attorney, you want to separate your client from them. But the prosecution, on the other hand, obviously wants to say that this was a conspiracy, that all three were engaged in illegally trying to detain Mr. Arbery, and therefore all three should be held accountable.
Emeke Igwe, thank you so much for your analysis.
Hi, everyone. George Stephanopoulos here. Thanks for checking out the ABC News YouTube channel. If you'd like to get more videos, show highlights, and watch live event coverage, click on the right over here to subscribe to our channel. And don't forget to download the ABC News app for breaking news alerts. Thanks for watching.